And ultimately, I think this is what led to his firing. I don't even think it has to do with the ratings. I don't think it has to do with what was happening on air. I think it really has to do with losing the people that work there. Because for years, Jeff Zucker ran CNN as incredibly right wing. He was fine because he had his office on the 17th floor with the other reporters. Chris Licht came in, moved his office to the 22nd floor with his own view of the Hudson River, had his own receptionist, and that made people that worked there feel like they were disconnected from the person leading the company. That was maybe the worst thing that Chris Licht did, because that led to him getting fired. Like, that's ultimately, people that worked there didn't feel like he was one of them. That's why this happened. That's why this piece was written the way it was. That's what led to him now being fired. Because again, the actual, what was happening on air at CNN wasn't really all that different than what was happening in the past under Zucker. But there was also this piece that came out on Monday, which I think was the last domino to fall, from Oliver Darcy, who is the CNN media critic. So this is a CNN newsletter, and I'll get to a quote from him in a second here, but he also goes on to be critical, and not be critical himself, but he he's just reporting on what people feel there. And I think ultimately, when that is in a CNN newsletter, it's hard to ignore the reality that people do not want, or I should say the employees at CNN did not want Chris Licht there. So this goes to the news of him being fired. Quote, I met with Chris and he will be leaving CNN. David Zaslav, the chief executive of parent company Warner Brothers Discovery, told CNN employees at the start of the network's daily editorial call Wednesday. Licht's departure, which came days after a devastating 15,000-word profile in The Atlantic, capped a tumultuous year for CNN, marked by layoffs, historically low ratings, and rock-bottom employee morale. I will say a lot of this stuff is not really on Licht. The layoffs, when Licht first came in, they got rid of CNN Plus, which CNN had put like all this money into their online, I guess it was an app, CNN Plus, and it just bombed immediately. And then it was Chris Licht's job to just follow through with what David Zaslav had decided in terms of getting rid of CNN Plus. So that isn't necessarily on Chris Licht. But of course, all of this touches anyone at the top of these companies, because ultimately it is their direction, whether it's Zaslav, whether it's Chris Licht. Even if Chris Licht is just carrying out what Zaslav wants him to do, he's still carrying out those orders as opposed to putting in his own perspective. But in terms of viewership, their primetime ratings tanked 61%, and that was a report from back in March. And more specifically here, this is more recent, CNN's total primetime viewership sank to 494,000 viewers, a 25% year-over-year decrease. I've had YouTube videos that have gotten more views than this. Now, I know it's not the same thing. It's not live viewers. But that's pretty terrible, especially considering it is a 25% decrease. And MSNBC, their main competitor, on the other hand, averaged 1.16 million for a 14% gain compared to last year. And MSNBC, to their credit, in rare cases, have great people like Mehdi Hasan. And the fact that they've actually kept Mehdi Hasan on has only helped them. So when you have people like him who are actually willing to speak to issues like the far right-wing Israeli government and their abuses against Palestinians, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's unions, low wages, healthcare, even if it's just one person on the network, because, MSNBC is still a massive corporation. They still don't want that to be the main message being put out there. But if they give enough carrots or hold enough, I don't know, carrot's probably the wrong terminology here. If they have, one cupcake handed out to the audience, it's enough to keep people watching that network compared to watching CNN, where, again, they're just capitulating to a further right-wing audience. But Tim Alberta, he's the writer of the Atlantic piece, wrote here, in setting up that piece, I spent stretches of the past year shadowing Chris Licht, the new boss at CNN, who harbored ambitions of rehabilitating the journalism industry. This is an account based on interviews with nearly 100 of his own reporters of what went wrong. Now, the backstory to this is that Chris Licht signed on to agree to do this investigative piece of him over the course of this year, or this past year, because he thought it was going to be a success, right? Like Chris Licht just came in. He's like, all right, great. I'm going to have this reporter shadow me for a year. It's going to be great. I'm going to have this amazing piece of how I saved CNN in just a year. And it didn't, obviously didn't go that way. So that also speaks to Chris Licht's ego, which was a main feature in that piece. There was one part of the report where the reporter shadowing him at a gym. So Chris Licht is working out and he's lifting some weight and he's like, oh, I'd like to see Jeff Zucker do this. Like, why would you do that in front of the reporter that is going to be doing this expose on you? It's so embarrassing. And look, it's one thing if Chris was joking, like, oh, whatever, a tongue-in-cheek joke about how he's lifting weights and Jeff Zucker, I guess, didn't lift weights. But that was one example of many, countless examples of how Chris Licht was very egotistical, in his own mind, self-obsessed, and really was not engaged with the people around him. Which, again, ultimately, I think that is the main reason why he was fired here, is because he was not a good boss behind the walls of CNN, not necessarily because of what was being put out. So, New York Magazine here. This is from Brian Stelter, who used to work at CNN as the media critic, writing, he ultimately portrayed Licht, speaking of the Atlantic piece, as paranoid, self-absorbed, and reluctant to admit mistakes. Trumpian is the phrase several staffers used with me. And to be clear, these were all people who respected Licht at the outset. Quote, I was really rooting for him, one said. Another insider remarked, I'm so struck by how consumed he is by the coverage he gets and the respect his predecessor had. So again, speaking to Licht's obsession with what others were saying about him. Now, this is one example of how Chris Licht's tenure there resulted in some on-air disasters. So this again from the piece, live television is a volatile thing. People and sets and scripts are always being changed for all kinds of reasons. Still, CNN employees had reason to be suspicious. They wondered if some sort of deal had been cut with Trump's team, promising the placement of approved panelists in exchange for his participation in the town hall. At the least, even absent from some official agreement, it seemed obvious that CNN leaders had been contorting the coverage to keep Trump happy, perhaps to prevent him from walking off stage. At one point during the pregame show, when the word sexual abuse appeared on the CNN chyron, one of Licht's lieutenants phoned the control room. His instructions stunned everyone who overheard them. The chyron needed to come down immediately. So CNN was reporting facts about what had just come out in court about Donald Trump and that abuse case. And they were told to take it down because they were afraid of offending Trump before the town hall. This is clear journalistic malpractice. It's something that if you worked at CNN in that newsroom at the time, I would hope that you would feel the need to come out and at least leak this. I mean, I guess they were leaking it to this guy, but this is to change coverage like this to help a political candidate. Like, you can't get any worse. This is no different than what Fox News does. So, it shows you that this attempt to try and appease the right not only hurt their coverage, not only hurt their ratings, it also hurt their ability to do actual journalism. A couple last things here. Many CNN staffers feel the news operation isn't broken and thus doesn't need Zaslav or Licht to fix it. Zaslav, who seems not to agree, has channeled his views through Licht, sometimes loudly enough that others could overhear him doing so over the phone. But now Zaslav is telling associates that David Levy, who was brought in just, I think, on Monday as the COO to kind of babysit Licht in these 3 days, I guess, is bringing adult supervision. So the reason I want to share this is because it really shows you it's not just Chris Licht. This is also on David Zaslav, who I've recently also been talking about because of the whole writer strike and Zaslav, of course, runs Warner Brothers Discovery. So you have here